Hey, welcome to Vortex Garage, and today we've got an awesome video for you, especially if you're a fan of the Foxbody Mustang. And well, who isn't a fan of the Foxbody Mustang? I mean, come on, look at this thing. This thing's awesome. This is a 1982 Mustang GT. And well, before we tell you a little bit about the car to intro you to it, gotta admit something. You probably already figured this out, but this intro is being shot after all the work you're gonna see in the video today. There's a pretty good reason for that, and one that I think you'll all kind of feel and understand with me. And it kind of led us to the name of this project, which is Project Scope Creep. You know what scope creep is, right? You get a project, you figure, oh, I'm just gonna do one or two things on it, nothing big. And next thing you know, you're ripping this out, putting this in, rebuilding that, rebuilding this. You're doing 10 to 15 times the amount of work you originally thought you were gonna do. That's precisely what happened on this one, thus Project Scope Creep. Now, a little background on this car. First off, I've always loved the 82 GTs, and of the Foxbodies, I don't know what it is, this front bumper, just something about this front fascia. I love it. I'm enamored by it. You can get it on the 79 Pace car, the 81 Cobra, and the 82 GT. There might have been another submodel I'm forgetting about, but those were the three that I'd always kind of look for in the local ads. You know what I'm talking about, right? You always got some cars you look up and you go, well, if I find one that's that magical diamond in the rough that it's dirt cheap, but still pretty good, you know, that's what this is. Found this in the local ad. Price was awesome on it. It's enough for me to go look at it. And it turns out the car is pretty straight, pretty rust-free. Don't come up for sale very often here. And I passed one up several years ago and regretted it. So I jumped on this one. A little bit of a problem though, and that was under here. There was no motor. So the previous owner had pulled the engine out and put it in a V8 Ranger project. So it basically was sold as a roller. And it did have a bunch of spare parts in the back and was pretty clean otherwise, so I went for it. Well, the whole time I get it back and I'm like, hey, I'm working on my Spitfire. I really need to get geared up and finish this project. This is a long-term big thing that I really want to do. I don't want to get distracted by another big project. So the idea was too, I don't want to just leave it sitting outside and get rusty and have animals infesting it. I mean, this thing's pretty straight and clean. I want to keep it that way. So I figured the best thing to do would be like a weekend or 2 weekend thrash session, buy a cheap long block 5 liter, something I could bolt up to that original 4-speed SROD, get it to run bad enough to just move it around the driveway here. That way I could move it periodically, you know, not really roadworthy or anything like that, just be able to move it around the property. That way it would kind of keep it from getting wrecked. Well, I made a mistake. You see, I got this junky engine, which turned out to actually run pretty good. But anyway, you'll see. I did something bad. I painted it. I painted the engine, just a little rattle can of duplicolor engine paint. And it looked so good, I just couldn't stop. And then I had these $5 chrome valve covers that I bought at a swap meet like 15 years ago. Well, I put those on and I polished them and they looked really nice too. And then I painted a few other things and I did a few other things. And well, I don't want to go into it anymore because that's what you're going to see on the video today. So I hope you enjoy it. I really don't know how to end this intro, but I think you're going to enjoy it. So check it out, our 82 GT Project Scope Creep. This is my unicorn. This is a 1982 Mustang GT. That's right, the first GT of the Fox chassis realm, the return of the 5.0. Let's take a look. It's empty. No motor in this sucker. It does have the original SROD 4-speed in it. And well, the big question you might have at this point is, well, what are we going to do? We got a nice car, one we've wanted. It's got a big hole where a motor should be. Well, we got a plan. And here is our plan right here. This is a 5.0 motor out of a 93 Mustang GT. And as you can see, it's a little bit scrappy, but it's going to go in here. So we had an engine and we had a plan. We also had a ton of spares that came with the car and made us think we had pretty much everything we needed. Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of small stuff we needed and some things we decided to replace while we were at it. So we got things like a new flywheel, clutch, starter, and some small things like your hoses, bolts, clamps, all that kind of good stuff. Well, once we did that inventory, it was time to get the car up on the lift, time to go ahead and start tearing into it. First things first, we're going to get the old exhaust out of the way, the drive shaft, and pull that SROD out, and then we can start working on that motor. Because when it pops off, think it's coming out. It's moving a bit. Alright. Must look weird when you see a hammer swinging at your face.
Yes, it is. Try not to shine in your eye. The green piece anyway does. Here, pull that out.
Yeah.
Let's see.
There we go. Yeah.
You need a hand?
There we go.
All right.
Got it.
And you got that other thing.
So this wire, it's like we got to DJ Whitneyify this car. Like if you kind of come back here, we were trying to figure that out earlier. This bizarre twisted wire comes to this thing just sitting on a piece of strap metal, like sheet metal screwed to the body. Well, it's got an aftermarket cruise control. And the drive shaft has a magnet hanging on it, which I'm sure does wonders for the balance of the drive shaft. And it basically, it touched that magnet sensor there, and that's what gives the cruise control little device, you know, your speed. And it kind of goes off of that. So the trans mount, you can see, is pretty well shot. It looks like it's split. Oil does number on the rubber for those. So, but we should be able to get the transmission out. And of course this exhaust is really going to be problematic and in the way. But the shifter's up on the side piece here, so I don't know how easy it's going to drop down from the car. We might need to take the cross member out to get the transmission out easily because the exhaust is in here. Wow, that's actually heavier than the T5. I think. So with that kind of janky dual exhaust out of the way and our drive shaft, single hump cross member, and SRRD gone, most of the drivetrain was finally out of our 82 GT. Well, except for that 7.5 rear, but we're just going to have to deal with that another day. So we could finally move on the teardown on the motor. We found a used engine locally out of a 93 Mustang GT. So first up, let's go ahead and tear it down. Now the teardown of the engine, that went fine. But it was then that I noticed the half-empty can of Duplicolor engine enamel on the shelf, and it was that precise moment that the scope of the project began to change. Alright, as you can see, I certainly couldn't leave well enough alone. I ended up finding I had a spare can of engine enamel. So it was silver, it wasn't Ford blue or anything like that. So I went ahead and used that and went ahead and sprayed the motor just so we'd have something nicer looking to put in. Just something quick, nothing too intricate, but masked off everything I didn't want painted, and well, looks a lot better. So. All right, all in all, it doesn't look too bad. Definitely could be a lot worse. Remember, this is a junk engine, basically. This is a used motor that we're just getting slapped in this thing. All right, so we got our new oil pan gasket on. That's all cinched down and torqued to spec. So we've got the motor turned around. We're ready to go ahead and drop the intake on it. So we're gonna lay down some intake gaskets, get that intake put on, and go ahead and get it cinched down and torqued to spec. I think there's 3 torque tightening specs on that. We're gonna check that out. Let's go ahead and get the gaskets on. All right, we got our bolts finger tight. We can start with our first torque sequence, which is going to be 96 inch-pounds. All right, up next is 16 foot-pounds. All right, we'll step it up to the last one. It'll be 23 to 25. We'll split it right down the middle at 24. All right, now I remembered I had something in storage from an old project, and that's these right here. I've got a set of these chrome Ford Motorsports valve covers. I don't know for sure if these work with the roller cam motor, if the lift is too high on them, but we will find out. They sure seem to fit here. Look at that. That'll be nice to top it off with. So let's go ahead and get some gaskets on those. So these do appear to fit, but I'm using the original bolts from the cast pieces, and those were thicker, so it looks like I might need to put some washers on these, like at least one lock washer, to get these to fit right. But they seem to go on. They look pretty cool. We're going to try to use them. So getting the accessories bolted back on the engine was going pretty smoothly, until we hit the water pump, that is. So you can probably tell I was reusing the original bolts off the 93, and they were going in fine except for one of them that looked kind of gnarly. That one started to hang up a little bit, and before I noticed anything, we ran into a big problem. This was the kind of problem that ended up causing a little bit more work than we expected, but hey, this is Project Scope Creep after all. Uh-oh. Oh boy. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. This is what I get for using the old rusty bolts. These are barely torqued in there, and I just snapped one off. Probably weakened it from pulling it out. Oh man. Oh, this is not good. It's one of the long ones that goes all the way into the block through the timing cover, which means the timing cover has to come off. All right, everyone, we're back on the Mustang. So as you last saw, we snapped a bolt off on our water pump. Really stupid. Shouldn't have been using that bolt in it. The bolts that came with that old water pump were just nasty. The ones that specifically go through where the water passages are had a lot more corrosion on them. It's one of those deals where you know you shouldn't be doing something and you do it anyway, and then you pay for it. And that's what we did. So, but part of the reason for that is a new bolt kit with the right studs and the amounts for the accessories is $60. So I was kind of trying to save a few extra money there and reuse what I had. turned out to be a bad decision. So we've gone ahead and got the nice grade 8 bolt kit. We're going to use those new bolts, but we got to get the timing cover off most likely because we snapped that bolt pretty far down there close to the block. The first thing we got to do is we got to get this balancer off, or the harmonic balancer, the damper. We got to pull this off. So we've got a puller kit we're going to use. So one element of scope creep with the reassembly of our engine was the realization that if we're going to go ahead and pull the timing cover, well, we might as well replace the timing gear set. So that meant getting the engine the true top dead center, and we used the help of a piston stop to get there. Now you might notice I made the timing marks at the kind of circular indicator instead of the timing point. That's not a huge deal as long as you use that same reference point. I don't know why I did that, to be honest with you. It's weird sitting in the editing booth seeing it. At any rate, this is one of the items that we'll probably make a follow-on video to kind of show you the details of how to use a piston stop to find true TDC. Now I went ahead and used an impact because just turning it by hand, the pressure of this pressed on piece would actually end up turning the motor. So we went ahead and used the impact on it, which I prefer not to do with these tools, just to protect the threads on them. But if you leave the threads up and go slow and be careful, you can usually do okay. So while you can remove the timing cover without removing the oil pan, this was a chance at redemption. That is, replacing the crummy cork gasket I used with a nice one-piece unit. Because, you know, project scope creep. All right, now we can go ahead and get this pulled off. There we go. I don't want to ruin my nice engine paint here. I mean, come on, look at how shiny everything else is. All right, so we're going to do our best to clean this bolt off, and then we're going to go ahead and get a stud extractor on it, and we're going to hope for the best. Oh yeah, she's coming. So nice and slow. I don't want to break it off again. Oh, we're home free. Here, free. So after breaking a bolt off in the water pump, well, we learned our lesson. We're chasing the threads for the timing cover and the water pump, along with using the new bolts. So since we were in this far, it just made sense to replace the timing set. Although there's a lot of options out there for timing sets on small block Fords, well, we just went with the stock replacement. On an engine like this 5-liter Ford V8, the timing set consists of the timing gears and chain that basically connect the crankshaft with the camshaft. So this is essentially the part that allows the engine's pistons and valve train to all work in unison, or time. As such, always pay attention to any timing marks when you're installing a timing set, and of course be sure to torque everything properly. Oh, and that one-piece oil pan gasket, that's a much better part than the multi-piece cork one we were using. cleaned them out. So I've got our new water pump bolts here. We're basically back where we were last time we cut in with the video, and before we went ahead and flipped this thing over, took the water pump off, the balancer, the timing cover, put a new timing set on it, put a new oil pan gasket on it. So all in all, I think it was a positive thing because that timing set was a little bit worn out. And well, we got our new water pump bolts in. They're really nice, and they're going to be good. So we're going to get that torqued down. All right, we're going to start putting our accessory brackets back on as well. We're going to use the brackets off the 93, though it appears I have two of these. These are alternator brackets. I can't remember if I got two of them when I bought the engine or if one of them's from the 82. Can't imagine they'd be the same, but they might be. Anyway. And so we continued digging through our used parts pile and picking up various brackets and accessories and pulleys and basically building the front of the engine, getting the serpentine system set up. And with that, the engine was ready to come off the stand. That meant we could work on the back of the motor a little bit. You know, the rear main seal, the flywheel, the clutch. And then of course the bell housing and the transmission. Oh, I was starting to get excited. We were getting really close to dropping this in the car. Well, you know, hopefully not dropping. First up on the back of the engine, pulling and replacing the rear main seal. It's one rear main seal. It actually looks pretty nice, but that's all right. We're going to replace it. I got pretty fortunate, and in a bearing puller tool, I found this really large bearing press, and that actually fits over our rear main seal pretty good. So I'm going to use that to tap it in nice and straight. A lot of other places I'll just have you kind of go tap them in, and you can really damage them doing that. So we're going to get it mounted up by hand. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and put our bearing cap over it. Just like that. Nice and easy. So that's one rear main seal replaced. Of course, we grease it like we do every other seal around here. Next is the pilot bearing. Now, if you don't have a pilot bearing puller, we're going to test out a few alternative methods for removal, and we're going to see how they work out for us. All right, so to get our pilot bearing out, I mentioned we were going to use the grease trick. Now what that is we're going to pack it with grease, and then we're going to use a tool to kind of push in there, and the grease will compress and actually push the pilot bearing out. Now hopefully this will work. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people end up using pullers on them and having trouble getting the race out, but we're going to give it a try with the grease before we do anything else. Now what I've got here, this is I think it's a hitch pin of some kind that I had. You could use a bolt too. And as you can see, it fits in here nice, but there is a little bit of slack in it. So I went ahead and wrapped it in this nice PVC tape, and that's going to give me a little bit more of a tight seal on it. So that's going to help us. So let's go ahead and pack this with some grease. And we're going to take our hammer. Okay. We'll continue to pack it with some more grease. And we'll hope that this pilot bushing or pilot bearing will go ahead and pop out for us. You know, this is making a mess and not doing a goddamn thing. I'm now greasy as hell. That rag is totally soaked with grease. My hammer's soaked with grease. My cart's greasy. Nothing. All we got with the grease method? A big mess. How about the wet paper towel method? So we're going to try the paper method next. I'm a glutton for punishment, and I really don't want to go back out in the town. So I do not have a bearing puller, a pilot bearing puller I should say. all we've managed to do is mangle it. So, all right, so we've got some scraps of paper we're gonna go ahead and put in. It's just paper towel. We let them soak in water. I don't have any bread. That's the only other one I know. There's grease, there's bar soap, then there's the wet paper towels, or wet paper, and then bread. And then when all those fail, you go get off your butt and you go into town and you get the tool that you need. Guess what? It's working. Our bushing or bearing, whatever you want to call it, is coming out. Yep, that did it. There you go. There's one pilot bearing removed, and there's all of our shards of paper and grease and whatnot that we're going to need to clean out of there. Pretty cool. All right, we got our new rear main seal installed. We got our pilot bearing installed. We're going to go ahead and put our motor plate on, making sure that we get it on the right side and use the right holes. Since we were converting to a T5 over that old 4-speed SROD, and well, since we had everything apart, well, it made sense to use that opportunity to replace both the flywheel and move to a 10.5-inch clutch. Now, brake clean, use that to remove any oils that might be on the flywheel surface. Using new bolts, we mock things in place, ensuring all the bolts would thread in by hand before moving forward. All right, so we know they're going to thread in hand tight, which is great. So we're going to go ahead and take them out one at a time. We'll put the appropriate thread sealant and lubricant on them, and then we'll run them down and then prepare to torque them in a star pattern in sequence. So we ended up using new bolts from ARP, and we also used their included thread lubricant as well as ARP's own provided torque specs. All right, we're ready for our first torque, which is going to be 30 foot-pounds. All right, that's 30. So we're going to jump up to 60. We're going to do in 3 stages, so 30, 60, 85. Nice thing about our paint pen, we can come back and check. If they all have 3 lines through them, that means we've torqued them all to the ARP specifications. Our flywheel is now installed. Since we were touching it, we'll give the face of it one more wipe down. Now we can get our clutch in. Assembly put together. Of course, just like the flywheel, we're going to clean off the surface of our pressure plate because it's going to have some oil from the factory on it. I've got the clutch disc on the pressure plate, my fingers through the alignment tool, and then we're going to mate it up this way and align the dowels. Now it's important to remember with the Windsor-based Ford small blocks that the engine balance is external. So in the case of our engine, it actually has a 50-ounce balance, which you can find on the front damper as well as on the flywheel. Now you got to be sure to know what your balance is when you're ordering replacement parts so it matches up. Now, no worries on the flywheel install. It should only line up one way to be sure that balance is offset correctly. Like we always encourage, be sure to follow factory torque specs. 6. We can go ahead and take out our alignment tool, and our clutch is perfectly aligned, and we're now ready to put our transmission on. So we continued by prepping the bell housing, getting the throwout bearing in the clutch fork, which was installed in the pivot. And once again, this is an area where we can kind of follow up with a little more detailed video to kind of show you the steps from replacing the flywheel and clutch all the way to putting on the bell housing and transmission. Here's a tip for you. If you're installing the transmission and you can't quite get it to seat that last bit and turning the output shaft isn't helping to line things up, go ahead and depress the clutch slightly. It'll pop right in. Alright, and that did it. We are now fully assembled. So in case that was a bit hard to see, and if I blocked the camera, I basically used a pry bar to disengage our clutch, and that kind of got everything seated the rest of the way. Now we can go ahead and get our bolts lined up, and get our bolts installed. And with all that done, our engine and transmission assembly is all set and ready to go in the car. And yeah, in case you were wondering, we did have to pull those headers off before trying to drop it in. Keep pushing. A little more. All right, stop right there. All right, go ahead and push. A little more. All right, hold right there. All right, we're almost in. So I'm going to drop it a little more. All right, stop. Now we're in the home stretch. A little bit more. All right, right there. Okay, now we're good. Okay, go ahead and push it forward. Just a tiny bit more. So the big question is, can I get under the lift arm with the jack? All right, it's officially resting on its own. So it's officially on the engine mounts. So finally, we had our engine installed, and dang did it look good. And well, if you think about it, that's kind of one of the big problems with scope creep, right? You know, having such a nice looking $300 used engine. And yes, below that thin coat of duplicolor engine enamel may lie a slightly tired 5-liter. In reality, keep in mind that we actually plan to stick with a small block Ford architecture as we build this car out further. So many of the accessories and small parts we got to make this work, well, they're going to support those changes in the future. And that's one of the reasons why the scope creep makes some sense. I mean, it's building a good foundation for the future. At any rate, at this point, it sure felt like we must be close to being done. I mean, come on, big stuff had happened, the engine and transmission are in. Well, this is Project Scope Creep, and as many know, it's the small jobs after the motor goes in that can really take some time. As a result, we've got a ton more to tell you in this story. So for now, this is the end of part 1 of Project Scope Creep. But don't worry, we've got part 2 just about done and just about ready to post. So you're going to be able to see the conclusion of this project very soon. Check back to Vortex Garage and subscribe, and you'll be able to see this wrap up.